So, what's driving open data? So, like, what's causing all of this open data to be published, and who's kind of responsible and looking after the program itself? So, like I mentioned, the Open Data Program is under the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, so it sits under the minister there, and there's the Open Data Unit within that, and they are who we work with on a direct basis for the portal and all of the different elements of it. But from a governance perspective, then the Open Data Unit deal with the open data liaison officers. So every single public body and government agency and department and local authority has an open data liaison officer. So if you have a query around any open data set or data set that could potentially be published, that will be directed then to them, the open data liaison officer, via the open data unit, via the portal itself. From a governance perspective, who's making sure that the program is meeting its objectives and the strategy is being implemented, is the Open Data Governance Board, like I mentioned earlier on. So that consists of some people from the public sector, but mainly then from business, civil society, academia, media, to make sure that it's meeting the needs of users. And also then the Open Data Advisory Group, which is a group of, that's more kind of coming from public sector bodies themselves. So representing, well, these are the challenges that we're facing in creating APIs, for example, or meeting the publishing guidelines. So that's kind of how the governance structure works. From a policy or legislative point of view, the open data strategy was defined in 2017, covering until 2022. But that kind of sits as part of a wider policy picture. So here we can see lots of different national policies and acts and strategies that are related to open data. For example, our Public Service 2020, the National Data Infrastructure, the Data Sharing and Governance Act, e-government strategy, and critically the Public Service data strategy. So we'll just talk about that quickly first. So this is covering all data. So not only open data, but internal data sharing between public sector bodies and so on. So this was published in 2019 to 2023 by the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer, CIO. Again, they're based under, they're part of DEPR, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. And they defined lots of different elements as part of the national data strategy, including an interoperability platform, privacy and security, governance and standards, trusted identifiers, and so on. But data analytics and open data was a key part of the national data strategy. So that's always very important that open data doesn't sit by itself or sit on its own. It's a subset of a wider data strategy. And this is important for public bodies as well, and for private organizations. So for every organization, that open data is part of the bigger picture. For the open data strategy, the open data unit are currently looking at the subsequent strategy, and over the summer participated or organized a number of public consultations where people could come and discuss, well, what's important about open data and what should be part of the next strategy for 5 years going forward. So we expect that to be released soon. At an international level, so open data is absolutely an international kind of phenomenon, and the European Commission holds it in very high regard. So there was a reuse of public sector information directive, which was revised as the Open Data Directive, and that was from, I think, 2019, and it had to be transposed into national law, so made into national law by July 2021, which it was here in Ireland. And that directive states that basically public bodies have to publish open data unless they have a good reason not to publish that information. That's the gist of it. But specifically, it says that the data should be published as dynamic data, as APIs, and not just kind of once-off data sets, like the 2016 data set, to limit the exceptions that enable public bodies to charge more than marginal costs of dissemination for data reuse. Basically, the data should be free unless there's a really good reason to charge for it. Because we see in some cases that maybe traditionally was that you had to kind of pay for information or data, but now is the case that shouldn't be charged. There shouldn't be charges unless there's a really good justification, the cost of collecting the data or so on. But in most cases, open data is free. extend the scope of the directive to include not only public bodies, but data held by public undertakings under a specific set of rules, different bodies or semi-state bodies, and utilities. And also research data resulting from public funding. So all data that is funded by SFI, Enterprise Ireland, and so on should also be made available as open data, and that's under the directive. And really to strengthen the transparency requirements between public and private parties, and the emphasis on high-value data sets. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So this is now, there's an open data statutory instrument within Ireland, so that means that all Irish public bodies have to publish open data. And it's open by default and design. So your starting point is, if you collect data as a government organisation, you have to make it open, unless there's a reason, as opposed to we keep it closed unless we've a reason to make it available. It's kind of trying to flip that thinking around it. And in open formats, open standards, as we talked about before, free reuse where possible. So this is the Irish guidelines for Irish bodies. Public utilities also now have to publish open data. Reuse of data held by public undertakings, such as utilities and transport sector. Research data. We want to prevent data lock-in or exclusive arrangements, so that, okay, I publish this information just for these particular parties to use, that the data should be out there so there's an equal standing, that everyone has access to the same information and can then do with it what they want. And a focus on real-time data, APIs, bulk downloads of big data sets, and so on. So that's what they're striving for. And this idea of high-value data sets, so there's always a question of like, what data should we be publishing? So ideally everything, right? But I mean, there's limited resources, so you have to start from somewhere. So you could start with data sets that are easy to use, or data sets that that you really know have a value. So you know, in your own organization, all of you kind of went to particular data sets that have meaning for you. So within a domain, say if we take the National Transport Authority or the Valuation Officer or the office or the Company Registration Office, they know that, okay, from the data that we collect and use internally, this is the data that we're most frequently asked for. This comes in maybe in FOIs, maybe in parliamentary questions, maybe we just know people use this information. So that's high value, right? So if there's a demand for it, it's high value. From the European Commission perspective, they're looking across the board and going, okay, in the public sector, these are the areas that we feel are high value: geospatial, statistical information, company and company ownership, mobility, earth observation and environment, and meteorological. And they're currently working on a implementing act at a European level to be more specific about that, to say, okay, well, this is exactly the data sets that must be made available across the board as open data in all of our member states. So for example, it could be the company register or something, to say all member states have to make that available. And then all of the member states will have to follow that implementing act. So that's nearly finalized, but not quite finalized as well. So that should come, I'd say, in the coming year. And yeah, so this is just a good way of looking at, if as an organization, if you're a data publisher, what data should I publish? It's really looking at, well, what are the questions that matter? What are the ones that there will be a demand for the data that's out there. So as a data publisher, you have to really tie into your community. And you might know your community, which is great. You might talk to them on a daily basis. But in the open data world, we also organize a number of events and webinars, series, and different things to help bring data publishers and users together. I guess just that the open data isn't being published in a silo or in a kind of an echo chamber, right? That you're hearing from the users themselves. So for example, the Valuation Office, the CSO, who else did you guys tie into? Well, all of the data publishers that you picked out the data sets from, I'm sure you're like, this is a great data set, but this could be better, and this one is missing, and this is a good data set, but it was hard to access, and it's not up to date or whatever. So it's important to have that conversation around it, and we try and facilitate that as their links and together with the open data unit as well. So like I said, we organize a number of events every month or a couple of months. There's something on, and so I'd encourage you to, I'll say at the end, how you can kind of engage and sign up for as much of those as possible. I don't think we've had one actually on the financial and banking space yet, so we might key into that domain after this presentation, after this lecture. The engagement fund, so again, the Open Data Unit is trying to encourage the use and the knowledge of open data. I mean, how many of you guys said, I've never heard of the site or of open data? So we really want to increase that as well. So this is funding where they power, it could be the development of an application, it could be the running of events, it could be different community sessions or whatever, but there's actually basically money that I think it's up to €5,000 that is given out to say, okay, you build an app on open data and then we can share it and kind of support that as well. So that's an annual engagement fund. So even if you're looking to do, and it's for private organizations, for individuals, it's for students, it's for whoever wants it. So if you wanted to do something with open data and wanted to tap into, you've maybe a couple of people in your team, tap into a small bit of funding, and this is a way to do it as well. And because it's great to get examples from, and especially from private sector and from larger organizations, just to prove and demonstrate that open data has value across the board, not only in a student app or a civic society event, which it absolutely has, but also for kind of a wider commercial value as well. And then on the other end, it's very important for us to measure how open data is being used, how it can be improved, and so on as well. So there's actually a researcher within the Open Data Unit who's dedicated to looking at the impact assessment around open data. As well, of course, we track lots of metrics from the site, from the use, from the downloads, things like that. But that doesn't show, because it's anonymous, because we want it to be easy as possible to use, that doesn't show exactly how the data is being applied. So if one of you guys download it and say, okay, well, we use that internally to make decisions about should we loan approval around this kind of type of loan, then that's a really great example, but it's very hard for us to capture unless you tell us. So we have to kind of go out and ask and go, well, have you used this data? What do you use it for? And so on, to try and build up that. So we have lots of examples to give about how the open data is used, how important it is, so that that data continues to be published. And so that basically the public body management team, so like say the CEO of Dublin City Council, if they're kind of going, listen, why are we investing all of this effort into publishing the information? Like what's the point? What's the benefit? It's really important that the Open Data Unit, the Open Data Liaison Officers can say, well, it is really important because look, these banks are using it for making these really important decisions around loan approval and so on. And that's a very strong business case for that. So the more engagement, the better. And then, different tracking around the different data sets, the views, the downloads, I guess as well around the data quality. So with the Smart Dublin, we're actually comparing the different four council and trying to harmonize data as much as possible. So for example, they might be publishing data around housing, how many empty units there are, whatever, but they're publishing it in completely different ways. So it's very difficult if you're trying to bring that information together and use it. And then going back to the original question about data cleaning and preparation, there's a lot of effort involved in that. So we want to be able to measure how the quality of that data set, how easy is it to reuse. If everything was perfectly standardized, that'd be great, right? But that's not possible because open data covers such a wide variety of domains, data, whatever. So it's just impossible for everyone to like agree on one data model for all data in the world. Like you might do internally, you have your particular database structure or whatever, you have your data model. But so what we wanted to do is get to a best effort to say, okay, well, at least if the metadata is all standardized using DCAT, at least if you use this geospatial format, if it's geo information, okay, if it's information around housing, that it includes these properties or whatever else, so that there's some commonality and that it's easier to bring that data together and to integrate. And then I guess there's the skills that are needed in-house, both as data publishers and data users, that are common across data teams in general, that you're able to look at data, understand the technical elements of it, that you can carry out an analysis, that as a publisher, you kind of understand, well, this is what we're looking for and so on. So capacity building is very important. For us, we support the government agencies that if they say, listen, we want to publish open data, but we don't know where to start or how to do it, to help them with that. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So that it's as easy as possible to use. And I guess from your side, to build the capacity so that they can look at open data and incorporate that, or integrate that with your own data, for example. So to support with actual skills that they need. And I mentioned before the procurement piece, which is always going to be a challenge for public bodies. So there's actually a procurement framework has been put in place last year, I think, for open data and data management. So if any government agency wants to procure any open data services around, maybe they want their own data platform, maybe they want help around data management, maybe they want other kind of consultancy advice or support services, that they can go directly to that framework, and it's easier for them to get the services. And it's actually a preferred supplier framework, which Deirdre links. So yeah, it's great that we can help different government bodies if they're looking. And that was an open tender that was put out, and we submitted for that as well. So I guess it means that we work with a lot of different government agencies around their open data preferences. But of course, the services that we provide government agencies are also what we provide with sustainable development organizations, international organizations, and with private organizations as well. So if any of your organizations that you work with are looking for any of these services, then we can help out obviously with that as well.